Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. I've had a number of questions about what my plans are for League Start. I'm going to be League starting a Righteous Fire Chieftain. Chieftain actually did receive one last second buff today, and we'll go through that in a sec. But the key thing to note is that Path of Building is broken for Chieftains and for actually all the new ascendancies and a lot of the new content at the time that I'm recording this video. So, whilst I will provide a Path of Building down in the description of this video below, it is not going to be accurate. Additionally, the Path of Building you will see here is not really finished. This is a first plan. This is not something I'm going to say, hey, here's a build guide you can definitely follow. Instead, it's here's my plans for getting started, and it's something that I expect people will probably deviate from. Additionally, this is something I expect to deviate from as well. I don't expect that this will be the exact character I'll end up playing once it gets to endgame. I'm sure that there'll be little changes that'll get made as we go, but I have tried to set it up with very, very basic gear that's pretty easy to get your hands on. If you're someone that's a bit less confident in creating a build and modifying it on the fly, what I suggest you do is having a look at Pox's Righteous Fire Juggernaut build, because it's a tried and tested build with a very similar playstyle to this, and I'll put a link to that down in the description below. That's something that you can definitely safely start, and then if you like the look of the Chieftain, if you perhaps see me streaming it, and you decide, hey, that looks like fun, then you'll be able to respec to it. Because you'll be in the same character class, and we're going to mostly have the same gear. As always though, your Atlas plan influences your character build a bit, so we're going to go through the Atlas setup first. Our core idea here is that we're going to use the base strategy of Wandering Path tree to get started. This has become a pretty dominant strategy, but if you're interested in more detail on how it works, I'll put a link down in the description below to Crouching Tuner's video which outlines it. That's his Atlas plan, which is going to start very similar to mine, although we'll diverge once we start building new mechanics into it. So the core of it is that you are going to climb up through the center, then you're going to pick up this Kirak wheel, then you're going to pick up basically all of this central wheel. You don't need to take both of the keystones, you just need to take one of them, but you're going to want to take all the small nodes. And you're also going to take the 7th gate, which we'll be using much later. For now, it's just a travel node. Then we're going to make a beeline to Wandering Path. When you click Wandering Path, all small nodes have their effect doubled, all the large nodes have their effect zeroed out. So we're then going to be using Wandering Path for a while. The key trick here is that this is going to cause your map sustain to skyrocket to the moon and back. You're then going to go down and pick up more Kirak mission chance, and also start picking up a couple of other map sustain nodes, especially given that these small nodes are all going to be doubled. After that, we're going to then start filling out some expedition nodes down here and also around in this wheel. You don't need to take Extreme Archaeology, it's something that's going to make things a lot more difficult. And also at this point, we're going to pick up Stream of Consciousness. Stream of Consciousness is not forever. We're going to take it for now, and then you're going to respec out of this once you've got 50 to 100 scarabs saved up. At that point, you can do better by using scarabs than by using Stream of Consciousness to give you a tiny percentage of the effect of a scarab without using a scarab. But for the starters, we're going to use this. Then we're going to start picking up all of the rest of the heist and expedition support on the tree. So we've got this cluster up here, and once we get rid of Wandering Path, we're going to be taking Rather Not, Noble Quest, and Scratching Up the Ground. All of these will buy us against getting Gwenin, because Gwenin is the worst of the expedition NPCs by a long way. Then we're going to start picking up all the heist content. One thing that's important, even if you don't really intend to run heist much yourself, picking up all of the heist support is still good, because heist events in maps give you loot that's easy to sell, especially when you've got bulk of it, and also the in-map events take almost no time at all. Then we're going to start turning on the 7th gate. So the key to that, we don't want to pick up the Mortal Gateway here. This is a bunch of annoying travel points. There's no really getting around it. These ones are just wasted. We're going to have to waste 2 points on the Cryptic Gateways. And then we're actually going to get some benefit out of the Eldritch Gateway, because we're going to spec that, and then we're going to go pick up all of this good Searing Exarch stuff over here. Now, one of the advantages to being a Chieftain is that we can run Searing Exarch altars, including with Wrath of the Cosmos. If you're playing a Juggernaut version of Righteous Fire, you're going to have a bad day when Wrath of the Cosmos is active, because it's going to gigabuff fire resist on some of the maps that you encounter. Not necessarily on every single monster, but the altars will either gigabuff the fire resist of the map boss, or of the Eldritch spawn. Either way, these are going to be quite annoying for a build that deals only fire damage, except for a Chieftain where your Ramako aura is going to suppress the fire resistance of all nearby enemies, knocking them to -20 at least when you are stationary, only against fire damage over time, but we're only doing fire damage over time. We can also use Frostblink to sort of get around this stationary issue, so if you need to dodge out of the way of a monster, you can Frostblink it. If Frostblink is on cooldown, then in that case, there's no question you have to move, and that's going to turn off Ramako while you're actively moving, but as soon as it's safe, you can then Frostblink and stop. So, Wrath of the Cosmos is good. And if you're asking why I'm not using Eldritch Gaze and the Eater of Worlds side and staying Eater of Worlds aligned, it's because Searing Exarch altars are much better than Eater of Worlds ones, at least In 321 they were. It's going to depend on the 322 economy, but for now, I'm just going to assume it's going to be the same. Now that we've gone through everything with the Atlas, and I'll put a link down in the description below to my Atlas tree, then we're going to have a quick jump over to Path of Building. Fair warning, at the time I'm recording this video, Path of Building is not yet working for the Chieftain Ascendancy. So there's a bunch of nodes that don't work. The reason my fire resist is high, but my cold and lightning resist are not, is because Tassalio Cleansing Water is simply not working. Additionally, Valako Storm's Embrace doesn't work. This node isn't modeled in Path of Building either. It is going to be your Eternal Lab node because it's the least important, but it does help you keep stationary by allowing your Searing Bond totems to taunt monsters. Now, Ramako Sunlight is not functioning at all in Path of Building, but the intended behavior now, and this is a recent change, is that nearby enemies' fire resistance is negative 20% against damage over time when you are stationary. So the reason we're using Ramako as opposed to the traditional setup on a Juggernaut Righteous Fire, where they use at least flammability, possibly also elemental weakness, then they use Wave of Conviction or some other source of exposure, and then they also use Scorch. The setup that a Juggernaut typically uses is objectively better than the Chieftain's Ramako in situations where you're fighting a monster that has 50 points of fire resistance, for example a Maven. But since 3.18, the game has been adding more and more monsters that are very tanky, i.e. they have a high life total, and they also have an extremely high fire resistance. We're not talking 50%, we're not talking 60%, we're talking monsters that can have 150%, 180%, or in conjunction with Wrath of the Cosmos, conceivably over 200% fire resistance. The Juggernaut package can strip a monster's fire resist down from 200% maybe to 90%, but at 90% it's still capped fire resistance. That monster is still going to shrug off 75% of the damage you do. With Ramako, instead, they're going to be taking 380% more damage than they would from the Juggernaut, and additionally, you've got the ability to use the Curse Punishment. And at a higher end, you might supplement it by also using Anomalous Despair linked to a level 4 Enhance, and using a 30% Ashes of the Stars as well. With that setup, you can get even more damage multipliers. Our early axe plan is going to be to use fire damage over time from pretty early on. So we're going to rush down to Prismatic Skin, and we're going to rush up to the Fire Mastery cluster here. We're going to pick up Arsonist, but the main reason we want Arsonist is it's then going to give us this regenerate 1 life per second for each 1% uncapped fire resistance. Once we have that, we are capable of running Righteous Fire and using Searing Bond alongside it. And from that point onwards, we're just filling out, starting with the bottom and then working our way up the tree. And the most important clusters are this one here, which is going to be really good to start with. Eventually, you might actually replace this with Cluster Jewels. Now, let's talk about a couple of really weird looking things we're doing that do have some reason for them. Why are we taking Ignite nodes, you might be asking? We have 1, 2, 3 nodes that are completely dead except for their chance to Ignite. That's all they're giving us. We also have a little bit of incidental Ignite chance on Holy Dominion and also on this travel node here. There is reason to the madness here, but this is to test something. And that is that we're using Searing Bond as a damage skill, but we are going to experiment by attaching the new Flamewood support. Now, Flamewood support is a new gem that's being added in 3.22. We can't really model it yet. It looks like it has pretty good numbers on it, and so I'm keen to test it out. Our main Righteous Fire setup to get started is something a little bit unusual. We're going to be using both Vaal Righteous Fire as a 3-link and a separately linked Vaal Impurity of Fire, and we're going to put them into Vaal Caress. The reason for this is that Vaal Caress gives us +5 to the level of both Vaal Impurity of Fire, but also gives us 5 to the level of Purity of Fire, the same gem. And so that's going to then get us level 23 Purity of Fire more easily. And we can get a decent area of effect on Vaal Righteous Fire inside Vaal Caress as well. Later on, we will find a better solution than this. This is an early game setup only, assuming that Vaal Caress remains reasonably accessible at the start of next league. Most of the rest of the gear that we've got in this Path of Building is pretty much rubbish. We're definitely not going out of our way to have anything exceptional here. It's all pretty easily acquired stuff, with one exception, and that is this Stygian Vice, but this Stygian Vice could be replaced with something worse. Now, we don't yet have flasks because I haven't yet solidified what they're all going to be. These are some of the things that need to be worked out in the morning, and potentially worked out just by experimenting with things. Additionally, if it turns out that Flamewood ends up being disappointing, then we'll definitely mess around with other things, but most likely I will actually stick Fire Trap in here with the intention that Searing Bond and Fire Trap will scale off the same support gems and we will use both of them simultaneously to burn down bosses, rather than using Searing Bond and also the Ignites that are inflicted most of the time that Flamewood hits an enemy. But for starters, we're going to start with Flamewood because it's shiny and new. Or as well as we have Malevolence, Determination, and Purity of Fire to begin with, and this is something we'll look to improve as the character progresses. All the rest of the gearing is going to be dependent upon how the character feels. What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? What are the things that need to be adjusted? Ultimately, we want to go with the Formless Flame at some point. The Formless Flame is a unique helmet that drops from Breach content, and it is something that says your overcapped fire resistance increases your character's entire armor. So we're going to try and get that, and potentially even get a second copy of that same mod on a Grasping Mail. This is going to be a starting setup, but we're going to have a lot of exploring once we get to endgame proper, because the Chieftain is somewhat new, and like I say, it's not in Path of Building yet, so we can't go fully all in on it. Anyways, that is an overview of my plans. May your league start be fun, and I will see you around.